Sophie scrolled through the housing website, panic rising in her chest. It was 2 weeks before the semester started, and she still hadn't found a place to live. Every listing seemed either too expensive or too far from campus. Just as she was about to give up hope, a new listing popped up. It was a spacious 2-bedroom apartment within walking distance of the art studio. The only catch? The other room was already taken by a business major named Jake. Sophie hesitated. She had always imagined herself living with a fellow art student, someone who shared her passion for creativity. A business major seemed like her polar opposite. But with time running out, Sophie decided to take a chance. She sent Jake a message, hoping for the best. To her relief, Jake replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet up and discuss living arrangements. Sophie took a deep breath and told herself that maybe, just maybe, this could work out. After all, how bad could living with a business major be? The coffee shop was bustling with students, the air thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Sophie spotted Jake immediately, sitting at a table near the window. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark jeans, his laptop open in front of him. He looked every bit the stereotypical business student, organized, ambitious, and a little bit intimidating. Sophie, with her paint-splattered overalls and bright pink hair, probably looked like she belonged on a different planet. As she approached the table, Jake looked up from his laptop, a polite smile on his face.
"Hi, you're Sophie, right?" he asked, extending his hand.
Sophie shook it, her palms sweating. "Yeah, that's me," she replied, trying to ignore the feeling that this was the beginning of a disaster. They spent the next hour discussing their expectations for the apartment. Jake was a stickler for cleanliness and order, while Sophie thrived in chaos. Jake preferred quiet nights in, while Sophie loved hosting impromptu art parties. As they talked, Sophie couldn't help but feel that they were two completely different puzzle pieces, forced together in a box that was too small.
Moving in was just as chaotic as Sophie had expected. Boxes piled up in the living room, threatening to topple over at any moment. Jake, true to his nature, started unpacking immediately, carefully labeling each box and organizing its contents. Sophie, on the other hand, spread out her art supplies across the living room floor, transforming their shared space into a vibrant, if somewhat hazardous, art studio. The clash of their lifestyles became even more apparent as the days turned into weeks. Jake would wake up early, his morning routine a symphony of efficiency. Sophie, a night owl by nature, would often stumble out of bed just as Jake was finishing his breakfast. Their music tastes were equally divergent. Jake favored classical music and jazz, while Sophie blasted indie rock and punk, much to Jake's dismay. Their conversations were often strained, filled with awkward silences and polite disagreements. Sophie found Jake's structured lifestyle suffocating, while Jake found Sophie's spontaneity frustrating. They were like oil and water, seemingly incapable of mixing.
One evening, Sophie was working on a particularly messy art project, using coffee grounds and acrylic paint to create a textured canvas. Lost in her creative process, she didn't notice Jake enter the apartment, his face pale with shock.
"What happened here?" he exclaimed, staring at the Jackson Pollock-esque scene in their living room.
Sophie, startled, turned around to see Jake's horrified expression. "Oh, hey, Jake," she said nonchalantly. "I'm just working on a new piece. It's called Coffee Catastrophe."
Jake's eye twitched. "Sophie, this is our living room, not an art studio," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You can't just drip paint and coffee grounds all over the floor."
Sophie sighed, realizing that she had gone too far this time. "Sorry, Jake," she mumbled, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'll clean it up."
Jake, seeing her genuine remorse, softened his tone. "It's okay," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Just maybe next time you could lay down some newspaper or something?" To Sophie's surprise, Jake ended up helping her clean up the coffee ground chaos.
As they worked side by side, Sophie noticed a different side to her uptight roommate.
He was actually quite funny when he wasn't lecturing her about cleanliness.
They even found themselves laughing about the absurdity of the situation.
Later that night, after the living room had been restored to its former glory, Jake surprised Sophie even further.
He knocked on her bedroom door, holding a mug in his hand.
"I made you some hot chocolate," he said, a shy smile on his face.
"Thought you might need it after all that cleaning."
Sophie's heart warmed at the gesture.
Maybe Jake wasn't so bad after all.
She accepted the mug gratefully, taking a sip of the rich, creamy drink.
Thanks, Jake, she said, her voice sincere.
This is really good.
As they chatted about their day, Sophie realized that beneath Jake's buttoned-up exterior was a kind and caring person.
As the weeks passed, Sophie and Jake's relationship began to shift. They fell into a comfortable routine, their initial clashes replaced by a grudging respect for each other's differences. Sophie started making an effort to be tidier, and Jake loosened up a bit, occasionally joining Sophie for late-night movie marathons. One Saturday morning, Sophie was struggling to hang a painting, her arms aching from holding it up.
Need a hand? He asked, amusement twinkling in his eyes.
Sophie nodded gratefully, and together they hung the painting on the wall.
Thanks, Jake, she said, stepping back to admire their handiwork.
It looks perfect.
No problem, Jake replied, a genuine smile spreading across his face.
You know, for someone who thrives on chaos, you have a good eye for balance.
Sophie laughed, realizing that Jake was right.
They were different, yes, but their differences somehow seemed to complement each other. As they navigated their daily lives, Sophie and Jake found themselves sharing more than just a living space. They confided in each other about their dreams, their fears, and their frustrations.
I never knew you wanted to open your own business, Jake. That's really ambitious.
And I had no idea you dreamed of traveling the world, painting murals. That's amazing, Sophie.
One rainy afternoon, they found themselves huddled on the couch, watching an old black and white movie. Sophie, feeling a sudden wave of affection for her roommate, rested her head on Jake's shoulder. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned his head against hers, a comfortable silence settling between them.
You know, I really look forward to spending time with you, Jake.
Me too, Sophie. Your free spirit brings a spark of excitement into my life.
In that moment, Sophie realized that she had started to look forward to Jake's presence. His quiet confidence grounded her, while her free spirit brought a spark of excitement into his structured world. They were an unlikely pair, but somehow they worked. One night, while working late on a design project, Jake stumbled upon Sophie's art portfolio. He had always admired her creativity from afar, but seeing her work compiled like this, raw and full of emotion, took his breath away.
Wow, this is incredible.
He was particularly drawn to a portrait of a solitary figure, standing on a cliff top, gazing out at a vast expanse of ocean. The figure's back was turned, but Jake could feel the longing and the hope radiating from the canvas. It was as if Sophie had captured a piece of her soul in this painting. He was so engrossed in the artwork that he didn't hear Sophie enter the room.
See something you like?
Jake looked up, startled, his cheeks flushing slightly.
Sophie, this is incredible. You're incredibly talented.
Sophie, used to praise for her work, was surprised by the intensity in Jake's voice. It was as if he saw something in her art, something she hadn't even realized was there. From that night on, something changed between Sophie and Jake. The comfortable camaraderie they had built deepened into something more profound. They started spending even more time together, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company.
You know, I used to think we were complete opposites.
I know, right? The art student and the business major. What are the odds?
One warm spring evening, they found themselves on the balcony, sharing a pizza and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple.
But you know what? I've come to realize that our differences are what make this, us, so great.
Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had never thought of it that way before, but Jake was right. Their differences weren't a barrier, they were a bridge, connecting two different worlds in a way that felt both exciting and inevitable. As the semester drew to a close, Sophie and Jake found themselves on the cusp of something new and exciting. What had started as a housing arrangement born out of necessity had blossomed into a connection that ran far deeper than either of them could have imagined.
I thought you might need this for all your future masterpieces.
One night, after a particularly grueling week of final exams, Jake surprised Sophie with a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook, its pages filled with blank potential. Sophie's eyes welled up as she took the sketchbook from him. It wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of his belief in her dreams, in them.
Thank you, Jake.
In that moment, Surrounded by paintbrushes and canvases, business textbooks and scattered sketches, they shared a kiss, a silent acknowledgement of the love that had blossomed between them, a love story born from clashes and chaos, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful relationships are the ones we least expect.